Process-wise, so there's like two steps. First one is preparation, and the other one is co-creation. The whole idea of the second process, the co-creation, so that speaks to thinking together. That speaks to collective intelligence, and in order for that process to happen, we need time to coordinate our brains. So we used to meet together in forums where people project from their point of view. Like Stefan was saying, they stay in the role and they share some information. There's not much co-creation going on, right? And the co-creation thing, you know, the way we practice it is qualitatively very different. It's when people start thinking on top of each other, when they leave their role, they become themselves, they're bringing their experiences from the workplace, but they really form like a new group, right? Yeah, so the process will have these two things, and it's pretty half and a half. I mean, you know, we have to spend a lot of time for the preparation in order to be able to co-create effectively. Otherwise, we'll just get a mosaic of ideas and not reach that ability to build on top of each other, right? So that's the main structure of the process. You can go down on one more slide. And then we have some facilitators here in the room. So Maison will show up soon. Just finishes. He gives like courses at the local university in Beirut, and now he's in transit to get home. He'll be the timekeeper, and his ability is his sensitivity is ethos, right? So sometimes discussions break down because somewhere deep where the ethos is not aligned. Okay, and we don't notice the origin of the breakdown, and he's gonna try to put us on course if he senses that you know, we don't have a shared ethos, or people come from different sides and they haven't aligned yet, right? I'm more a process-oriented guy, so I'm going to speak to peer production, how things flow in the network and all that. And I can detect from language, I'm sensitive to that. I can detect like what kind of business models or economic models people subscribe to when they speak. So I'll try to create some alignment there. Stefan, I think his forte here is to pick up language cues and detect what's the state of mind of people. Is that individual still in the role? Does he still speak as a, I don't know, web developer in his own organization, or he has been able to kind of embody you know, his new role? So he's going to pay attention to these kind of language cues and correct. Okay, so we're going to ride this like a bicycle. Okay, so you know, it's a real process and can go off course here and there, and all these people are going to just sense these mismatches and try to realign. I really respect Vinny for his cultural sensitivity, and you know, he could sense misalignment in values, and sometimes communication breakdowns because of that. And Tim is here. He hasn't spoken yet, but we spoke before, and we thought maybe because Tim has like a broad view on things, he can pay attention to the whole process and provide feedback at the end. Like, was this really on course? Did we achieve what we wanted to achieve? And how can we like reiterate next time, right? Okay, so this is like who's there. Yeah, so
just one thing,
yeah.
Tiberius, just one little point. Rather than necessarily think that they're going to go into a new role, just think they're going to just be in a more flexible space for exploration and then come back. So if there's no, it's just a place where we go to another place, and in that place we're just modeling what happens, and it comes back and we see how that informs us in our more sort of cognitive world. There's no right, wrong, and
yeah,
it's not
perfect.
about what I want you to do, right? It's just literally what is, and whatever it is what it is, right? So that's all good.
Yeah, so that's a great example of how these other people in the room, they can jump in and adjust the course. Okay, so if I frame something and somebody senses that it doesn't do justice to the process, because they sense a problem at the cultural ethos, state of mind, you know, modeling, like economic modeling and all that. They can intervene, right? They can intervene, and just readjust the course. So thank you for your clarification. Now Andrew is here. So Andrew is, I don't know, an observer, but also he knows a lot more than anybody else on IoPA. So Andrew, you kind of find yourself a role here. Maybe you can see yourself as part of the facilitators and interject and jump in and correct the situation whenever you feel like, right? So we're gonna ride it out like a bicycle. Okay, we're just gonna advance, and there's potholes and things like that, and we just adjust the course in real time based on everybody's sensitivities. Okay, so what are the desired outcomes? First of all, so we're gonna explore the technical possibilities that better align agencies in material pre-production, and possibilities is important. So what I'm trying to say here is that let's not stop at specific solutions. Okay, sometimes we walk on a road, we see a hole in the road, and the immediate reaction is how do we patch this hole? So I propose to keep our head up and scan the environment. And maybe there is a valley, and when it rains, the water accumulates and it crosses the road, it washes the thing, and it creates holes. So plugging the hole is not the solution. And I want us not to not see the forest because our nose is too close to a tree. So we will make sure that we don't dive deep into solutions, but we try to kind of sense the space, sense the environment, detect problems, and try to see relationships between these problems, okay, and connect the dots. So it's just like an exploratory phase, and then IoPA will take the results of these gatherings and move into problem solving, right? So there's going to be time for that, but for now it's just creating more visibility, surfacing stuff at this point in time. Another desired outcome is to develop this inter-organizational capacity. So if you can stay there a little bit. And what I mean by that, I think this is very important. Our civilization is facing new challenges that we call wicked problems. And these cannot be approached in the industrial way, right? So, most of the times when we meet in inter-organizational space, it's for brief moments. We go to a conference, we go to a panel, we're invited on a panel, we embody our role in our organization and we project, and then as soon as it's done, we go back to our context, right? What we're proposing here is to create a work environment that has more durability in time. So we can see ourselves as kind of nomads in this ecosystem of peer production, and be able to kind of leave the tribal role that we have, and meet not just briefly, but try to make it a habit. And I think there's a lot of work to be done in traditional organizations to create these internal roles that are bridges to other organizations. Spend more time developing relations, spend more time outside than inside the organization. And that's what we're trying to do here. Okay, so these workshops are this in-between space, and it's nice if you can generate the sense of commitment and belonging to this new work context. I think that's IoPA. That's what IoPA is doing too. As an organization, try to become this other work environment for people that come from different environments. And I think peer production is all about that. It's developing inter-organizational capacity, okay? Because when you look at the distributed or decentralized manufacturing network, it's a lot of actors coordinating. So a lot of that stuff, the capacity of production is in between organizations, not inside any one of these organizations, right? Okay, move on. So I think this is, if we reach that outcome, it's very interesting. Yeah, so the scope, some of you are familiar with Internet of Production. Emmeline, I don't know if she is, are you familiar with it? Did you have time to check it out a little bit, what they're doing?
Just briefly.
Briefly.
Yeah, I mean, I think I have kind of a high level understanding, but it would be helpful for me to have like a solid introduction. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So there's a core group, right, that facilitates work on these 5 families of standards. And there's people that come from different organizations to help develop that. And we're focusing on what was originally called contracts and business models. And I thought that phrase there can cause cognitive interference, because this is terminology that we find in traditional, in the traditional settings. So I think, talking about agencies, alignment, and sustainability models instead of business models would allow us to detach ourselves from traditional models and think more freely in what peer-to-peer is and what we want it to become. So let's go with that for now. Alignment of agencies and sustainability models. Go down. So this is what we explore here. It's the number 5. Vinny, can you move down a little bit? Just move on down. Is Vinny there? Yeah. Okay. So yeah, so that's the setup. Anybody has some questions about that, about the process? Okay. So yeah, so let's move down and go into this preparation thing. So this is where it becomes more interactive. Okay. We noticed that when it comes to alignment of agencies, what we mean by that alignment of agencies is to make sure that people's behavior aligns for a common goal. And we talk about agency, which is related to intentions. And just to give you the stupidest example that we can come out with, you want to have a deal with someone to do something, and there's probably a transactional relation, I don't know, money for a service, and you have the knowledge, both you have the tools, and the other party decides to take the money but not provide the service. Okay, that's a very stupid example of what can happen here. The intentions are not aligned. Okay, there's ill intent on one side and there's good intent on another one. So how do we align those? Okay, so our society has produced some mechanisms to cope with that. So we can sign a contract, and we have a justice system that attaches penalties if somebody doesn't keep the promise, right? So that's a solution to that problem. But that's the type of problem that we're talking about. There could be many things that can interfere with decentralized or distributed production. We can have poor tools for collaborating online. We can have poor methods for doing stuff. We can have bad governance, bad rules. But suppose that you have all that, you still have to deal with intentionality. Okay. So we're going to focus now on tech. Are there technological solutions to that? Okay. And we just have to know that there are other dimensions on which people work. Okay, some people create standards that force people into behaving a certain way. Some people use legal tools, like I just mentioned. Some people work on the social space, reputation, shaming, and all that. Other people work on the economic realm, gamifying it. The tokenomics is all about that, right? So that you have a higher probability that people will behave in a certain way. And some people work at the ecosystemic level, developing the relations of interdependence, knowing that you cannot survive alone and you depend on the others. So if you start cheating or misbehaving, then you get shunned from that ecosystem. So you're on your own. So we're going to focus on tech. Okay, move one below. Yeah. So just to give you an idea about the tech, could be smart contracts. Okay, we come into an agreement and there is a program that will execute based on some conditions and we cannot change that. We talk about digital identity, online reputation, transactional systems, platforms, collaborative platforms, AI. Okay, so all these things. And I think neighborhoods is in a good position for that. There is threefold that has been invited. They are in the middle of a funding. So we missed them for this round, but they're going to become available 1 or 2 weeks from now. Holochain, Holo REA, you know, all these are, yes, okay, sorry about that. Sorry about misspelling. Yeah, so that's a good example of organizations that develop tools for this, right? Move on below. Yeah, so we just built some understanding about the context here and where we are. The goal aligns with IoPA goals. IoPA's goal is to make material peer production more reliable, more dependable. We're thinking about safety and quality and all that. And we are playing on a very narrow layer of that is human agency. And we're talking about technological solutions, not the other ones, right? And now, so I'm gonna ask some questions because I want to know which model are you operating in, okay? Because when we talk about material peer production, some people operate in decentralized settings and some people operate in distributed settings. So this slide and the next one, it's a sort of just an artifact that we can populate with some other information on top of that, just to situate ourselves. Okay, so this is what we're going to do here, and it's part of the brain coordination process. It's part of building this common ground so that we can co-create later, right? So I will try to get as much as possible from Emmeline. Just prioritize her because she can only contribute to this phase. So let me just present these two things to you, Emmeline, and I'm going to ask you the question: where do you think you could fit on this diagram, or if the diagram speaks to you in some way or another, right? So this one that you see here is for what we call decentralized material peer production. Where you have an NGO that takes a vital role of coordination and even perhaps some financial incentives. Okay, so a scenario here would be chemical spill somewhere in Asia, and an NGO wants to address this problem, get some money from the United Nations, and identifies an open source sensor for that chemical spill, and then has a list of a lot of local makerspaces and can incentivize them to produce these open source sensors, teach users how to use them, and get them in the hands of users. And then these users will create data about how this chemical spill evolves in time, and the government can formulate policies based on that data. And if you take away the NGO, that thing doesn't work, right? And then we can move to the next slide. And this is the more decentralized way of acting. And this is what we saw during COVID, is that a lot of makers operating at home or in maker spaces, they jumped up to the need of creating protection equipment, and there was no central coordination. They got some designs done. Some of these designs, they were passed to maker spaces to be made. They were placed in repositories of designs, and they got remixed by other designers and makers. And so all these feedback loops made the whole thing successful in designing and creating stuff and delivering stuff to hospitals, let's say. But we know that there was a problem with quality and the insurance, right? So Does this speak to you, Emmeline, when you guys work on neighborhoods?
Gosh, I mean, I'm not really sure where to enter in to answer your question. You mean like just kind of the idea of decentralized coordination without without an entity that's relaying standards and providing incentives and that sort of thing?
Yeah. So do they speak to you, the whole context? Do they speak to you?
Yeah, I mean, I can think of a number of, kind of reputation-based and sort of peer validating processes that could support some quality assurance from the ground up through kind of like technically scaling some in-person sort of peer assurances, like almost in the style of, like, the first thing that popped into my head was almost like a someone who has more of a role, like more of a local role per makerspace, say, who's in almost like a mentorship sort of role or a quality assurance sort of role, who would be able to do some of that on the ground, and then have only one person rather than a whole swath of people coordinating with another makerspace to kind of teach that same set of standards.
Okay. So okay. So you see, so you're talking about the makerspace as a context of work, right? Because we see here different contexts, right? There is the developers, like online communities, or even companies that develop platforms, may develop designs, hardware designs, but we can put in that also platform developers. Then we can see on this slide a DAO, which is like a sort of headless coordination mechanism that lives on a blockchain, right?
Yeah, I mean, for me, the makerspace is sort of the place where the rubber meets the road, like where
Yes.
the real problem of quality assurance comes into play. And so it's like, for example, using like a peer validating technology that's able to receive input about I don't know, like maker ratings of different designs. It would be possible to hold kind of like a repository of feedback, almost like reviews or kind of like vouches for a particular design. But I think, to me, that's the easier question. It's a hard question, but it's still an easier question. It's kind of like aligning on a design, or being able to hold in a database somewhere, like expert feedback on particular designs that are kind of validated by or vouched for people, who are trusted authorities in a community to vouch for something like that. But then the real implementation, I think, is it's kind of more attractive to me as a question, like how is it possible to scale that assurance with minimal passage of people through different
Yes.
physical spaces.
But you're not working. Are you working in makerspaces?
No.
Okay, you're not. Okay, so yeah, but you're addressing potential problem of these people, right? Okay. So you're trying to, what I'm trying to understand now is your thought process. You're reading this diagram to understand potential problems that can occur in a setting of distributed production, and try to understand how you could address it, right?
Yeah.
Okay, but your place of work, what would it be on this diagram? Like what do you call your context of work?
Oh, like in the creation of whatever DAO or whatever software environment would provide that distributed coordinating role.
Perfect. Yeah, because that's what I want to situate on the map. Is like where are you now? Like where are you speaking from, and and like Steve would say, where are you looking towards? So I'm understanding that you're looking towards these local maker spaces, right? From somewhere near the DAO, somewhere around the DAO there, right? Okay. Let me see what we see on the screen, because I would, yes, perfect. Okay, so now we see the context. So we can place some of these, maybe, Stephen, could you like place some markers on that slide that we see based on where Emily sees
Okay.
herself? And,
I'll just boot it up. Can you just put the link in the chat there? I just got to boot up the document and I'll put it in.
So neighborhoods is a framework for group-defined groupware on Holochain, which is a distributed ledger technology that is super good at doing peer validation. So Holochain is great because it enables countersigning of any data that is shared in a public space. And the countersigning basically ensures that people are putting valid data, like data that conforms to the rules of an application space, into that shared space. And so what Neighborhoods does as an organization is it creates the ability for groups, like for-purpose groups, communities who have some sort of shared project or shared mission, to bundle together lots of like little functional tools that don't presume a lot about what it is that they're trying to do with those tools. And then we enable sort of culture design on top of those. So as an example, like, I don't know, your group could use a to-do list, and then, but the application that you would receive, like a neighborhoods compliant application, would just provide, like a list making, with no real other opportunities for input. So say you have just like this basic to-do list. What you could do with the neighborhoods framework would be to add like a little plugin or a little widget that gives like a scale of 1 to 5 priority rating on the to-do item. So, just in this super easy example, it'd be like, you have this generic app, and then the group could come together and say, well, hey, we want to know specifically from people in this role what they think the priorities are on this particular list. Or, we want to give like we just want a simple thumbs up, thumbs down on this question from the whole community to kind of sense the temperature, in the space, in the community of whether or not people think it's important. So we basically give people the ability to bundle these like distributed social apps with little plugins that enable additional what we call sense making, or sort of like culturally specific valuation on any digital representation of an object in that space.
Okay. Yeah. So I think there's a lot of that information about what the tools are doing, and I guess what we're trying to understand now is, because we don't know if these are solutions to problems, right? So doers, I hope for doers to say we don't, alignment breaks down because we cannot coordinate, because we cannot have proper prioritization, right? So then that would become a solution. But for now, let's
Can I just add something to that just a little bit? I've just put a line on here, just this sort of from a DAO NGO to the users, but there may be some, like the hardware doesn't actually require the makerspace per se, except it may be that there is an artifact or something that could relate to the process that is made. But in the general sense, there's something from the DAO NGO to the what we'd call the user that would then be part of another stage, which would then be what, because not everything's inside. It can be out, things can be slightly outside of this space here, but like whereabouts outside, so some of it could be then that goes to this arrow here, where it's maybe going to a you've got this starting point here, and then it's and this is just how I'm sort of putting it in. It goes to someone. Is it like Sensemaker that's done by Kinevin, by the Dave Snowden type work? Is it something like that as a sense making app that allows you to capture narratives, or is it something different to that?
Yeah, it's not so much that it enables you to capture narratives, although I guess in theory that would be possible. But it's more that you can like overlay additional community input to kind of apps with basic functionality.
So the idea here is to create to populate these diagrams to create an artifact between us. It doesn't matter what these arrows. I mean, we have to agree and make sense of these arrows. So it's good that Stefan narrates that and tries to put meaning to these new things that appear on the graph. But the whole purpose here is for us to build this shared understanding, right? So we're just gonna drop stuff there and name it whatever. So I guess just because I wanna move to helpful engineering and see where they fit themselves, and that will feed back to you, Emmeline, because now we'll have a user perspective, right? And so it's good to iterate between users and doers. So I think what we get from here at the start is that you're operating somewhere in a space of web development. The DAO there doesn't really represent your organization, what you're doing. It's just let's say it's a node where coordination tools are provided to the network, and maybe design implemented, but that's the sort of a node in this ecosystem where these tools for coordination, for working together. It doesn't matter precisely what these tools do at this moment in time, but that's kind of where you situate yourself, and you're looking forward to makerspaces as agents in this ecosystem to use these tools, and maybe to users too, right? So you're looking from that place towards these places.
Yeah, and the only distinction from the DAO really is that, like, my understanding of a DAO is like, it's an online group with a bank account. With neighborhoods, you can do the sort of the sort of governance sorts of things that you might do with a DAO, but there's no need for like a token to be involved or like a bank account to be at the center.
Yes. So James, which one of these two, is it slide 12 or slide 13 that we need to highlight for you here?
I don't know which of the slides in
okay,
terms of...
can you put the focus on slide 12, Vinny? Yes. So that's the slide where we try to represent a decentralized process and not a distributed one, where let's say an NGO is seen as the problem solver and the local makerspaces are seen as part of the process that the NGO wants to set in motion. Okay. Slide 13 is where the role of the NGO becomes more distributed throughout a network, right? Instead of embodying that role of coordination as a moral entity, it just presents that the role of coordination presents itself as distributed infrastructure, as smart contracts and blockchain, holochain. It's it lives on a network, and it's not embodied as an entity, right? Which slide do you think you can?
Well, let me describe the roles that we have been trying to inhabit.
Perfect.
And then we can discuss where they exist. So first and foremost, helpful engineering is working to build reference designs to resolve SDG defined challenges. Let me unpack that a little bit.
Yeah.
SDGs are UN sustainability goals. Defined challenges are things that we derive from the SDGs that are specific issues that we can see a path to finding solutions for. And then a reference design is an OKH that resolves that issue in some way or another. So let's say the issue is climate change, right? And the challenge is harvesting energy. And the specific challenge is harvesting sunlight. So it's a reference design for building an open source solar panel system. Maybe it's a scalable design, right? And we would take that reference, validate it, peer review it, and then put it into a library and have it in a defined state as an OKH that can be used to execute a process of finding both the demand for that and the capacity to make it. So separate from that, we have a group inside of Helpful Engineering called Project Data that is working on building tooling for taking OKHs and trying to find demand for them and matching them to OKWs. The OK
just for the people
language-
here, just for the people here, because Emily is not, she doesn't know what you're talking about when you say OKH and OKW. Yeah.
So OKHs are an IoP creation, and it's a I would refer to it as a template for defining designs. And I would refer an OKW, which is OK where, as a definition of a facility or a entity that is capable of providing certain capabilities. And that means sort of a combination of tools and people who can manage those tools to execute processes. So we have a group that's called Project Data, and they're working on, currently it's a pilot project to execute that matching operation, which would generate fulfillment plans. And these fulfillment plans would be a description of what in common parlance we would call a supply chain, like the entities involved in making a thing. We can describe a specific fulfillment plan or a specific supply chain that is a possible path for making a specific OKH. And that might be as simple as someone has it in inventory, it's available. Or it might be as complicated as taking copper in its raw form and combining that with silicon to make a chip. So that would be my description of the two different areas in which I'm involved in this area of work.
Yeah, that's, I think we need to unpack that. So I can see one of your activities right here. I don't know if that's visible on the screen where I'm, yeah. So you're kind of addressing the needs when it comes to fabrication by working on standards, processes, tools. Is that a good representation? It's not everything, but we just, I'm just gonna start to put stuff on the map, and we can edit it as we go.
I think we've been participating in that process.
Yeah, if you go to the next page, oh, you got this one. Also, if you go to the next page as well, if you drop it into the next page, I duplicated the on page 14.
Okay, so I'm gonna just drop it there. Yes, to create just one artifact among us. Is it also the case that you are developing designs that are meeting certain criteria, for example, ESGs?
Yes.
So yeah.
More localized or more specific examples might be in the case of COVID orientated stuff. We worked a lot on ventilation. And so we have a number of designs that work in that space. And along with public well, 2 or 3 different entities. We have some designs for developing sensors that are able to detect flows of air that are appropriate
Okay.
flows for someone who needs respiration.
Yes.
And then we have developed tools that can produce those flows. So it's both the sensing capacity to confirm that you're
Mhm.
producing the correct pulses of flows of air, and then also the right types of air. So it has to have a certain amount of oxygen. It has to come at certain pulses. And so those are little clusters that not only do they have the capacity to produce the needed resource, which is ventilation in the time of infectious disease, but also the ability to confirm or validate that that work is being done correctly.
Uh,
That makes sense?
wait a second. That second part is interesting. So first of all, I see that you're talking from a developer's perspective, developer of hardware that would not necessarily that would somehow meet some user somewhere down the road, may not pass
Sure.
or may pass by makerspaces, but it doesn't matter. You work on these designs, and you spoke about quality, right?
Right. What I'm talking about is the
Safety.
designing of the testing equipment to confirm the quality of the output of the intended thing. Does that make
Yes.
sense?
So now from there, you're looking somewhere here to the users, right? Might be a hospital, okay, or a community medical center. Okay.
Sure.
So from there, you're looking from there as a designer, as an engineer, designer, you're looking there. But you're also looking at the processes of fabrication of these designs, because as a developer, you work on the design, with specification and some other generic criteria in mind, climate change and SDG and all that. But at the same time, you're asking yourself the question, once my designs are out there, okay, are we talking about open source designs?
Yes.
Okay, so once my designs are out there and take a life on their own, how are these other actors in this network going to coordinate around them, to use standards, processes, tools, right? To know where to find them, know to assess their quality, know how to build them properly, finding the proper methodology, right?
Yeah, a lot of that work relates to an experience. The experience was driven by having some designs made. So
Yes.
these are face shields. They're fully transparent. The object is made from a single plane of plastic, right? And it's geometrically folded to create a face shield, right?
Yes.
And we had these delivered to a hospital in Yemen that we knew was in desperate demand of face shields.
Yes.
And there was a vehicle sitting outside the hospital with I don't know, something like a few thousand of these face shields there, right?
Yeah.
And they were unwilling to accept them because they didn't have an FDA or a CE type stamp on them.
Uh-huh.
And so that has caused us to spend a lot of time thinking about how can we begin to validate these things in such a way that trust can be developed, so that that kind of distributed production can meaningfully fulfill these types of rapid spikes in demand that come from a crisis like an infectious disease circumstance.
Yes. Okay. Now I know that Emmeline, I just want to get a data point out of Emmeline before she disappears. So just to go through this feedback loop once, does any of that make sense for you, Emmeline? And do you start to see some type of relationships between what you do and what James is doing?
Yeah, I mean, what struck me most was this sort of like database of designs, really, obviously from the software side.
We call it repository or data. Yeah. Okay.
Mhm. Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah. Anything more specific question that you have? Like,
I just wanted to see how my data point is after everybody gives their input, does it do something for you to kind of move yourself towards this other core space of interaction, to say, oh yeah, okay, so I see some problems that James is struggling with. I can relate to some of these problems, and I can kind of embody a different role to be able to co-create with him. That this is what I'm trying to sense, okay? Because
yeah,
it's not
yeah. So
preparation. That's exactly what it is like going back and forth until we say, you know what? I think we got it. I think I understand where everybody stands in this picture. And it may be not 100%, maybe just a feeling that we have, but that's enough to move us into the space of co-creation, right?
sure. Yeah, and I think maybe to speak to a little bit more of
Yeah.
the whole process is
Mhm.
like, the database doesn't just come in at the first sort of rung, like at the first chronological moment of providing designs and pushing them out there in the world. Like, I think that there are existing technological systems that provide really nuanced forms of feedback and kind of making those databases more dynamic, and more able to capture some of the, not only like experience of the product from the consumer side, but also to create like feedback loops between makers and end users, or like accrediting bodies and makers and users.
Yeah.
So
So
you can do a nuanced sort of role, like nuanced roles in terms of permissions and invitations for specific feedback or verification, like in that database of objects, maybe their designs.
So before I move to Frank, because I just want to use as much as I can from your brain, Emmeline here. So here's something that could go wrong here, because we're thinking about problems, right? Now I put my hat of doer in the peer production sphere, material peer production sphere. James is talking about databases. So fine, we put stuff in a database, and then we have a crisis, and there's a bunch of makers that decide to make that. Okay, and maybe there's a financial incentive. I'm just inventing a problem. Okay, maybe there's a financial incentive, but some of these makers, they decide to cut corners, and instead of using the materials that were specified by the components that were specified by James, okay, in that database, they use something else, cheaper, because they want to, I don't know, because we're talking about intentionality, right? Because if there is a financial incentive, maybe they want more money in their pocket. So instead of using that sensor that James was talking about, they use a different sensor that is only half the price. Okay, so this is where the problems can arise. Like, okay, we have these repositories, these databases, we have the specifications, everything is written down, everything is beautiful. All the tools are there, all the good intentions are put into all these processes, but then somebody can decide to cheat, and some people may die at the end, or some government may have the wrong data to make policies on right? So I just, if you don't have time to answer, I just wanted to leave with that idea in mind. It's like, what is neighborhoods doing potentially to assess, to address that problem? How do we know that you manufactured that thing precisely according to James' specifications? How do we know?
Yeah. So that's actually what I was trying to speak to, like in the first instance of looking at this, which, so I don't know if you've ever heard of, there's like a concept. It's like a small, it's a small set of code, really, just like a JSON file, called linked trust. And it kind of, what it enables, and this is where software is, things can only go so far, right? Ultimately, the issue of forging data is something that's not, I mean, on the one instance, it's like it would be possible for some sort of non-human agent like some material sensor to be provided a specific role in an app space, like a verifier role. But on the human side, which is really much more neighborhoods focus, is this notion of linked trust, where essentially what you're doing is like staking your reputation on a claim that you make. So really, linked trust is like a connected series of signed claims. But ultimately, like provided there's like a sufficient amount of people, and this is where the makerspaces came in to my thinking, provided there's like a sufficient amount of people, like a hub that is physically connected, you can create in like attached to this database even, or in some other sort of social hub linked with it, you can create a system of signed claims, sort of attesting to the things that people around you are making. And and you can really tailor that system to the amount of time and ability that people have to assess those things. But basically, it's like a peer-to-peer system of sort of just saying like, I believe that that Stefan here is creating projects up to spec, and I feel 75% sure about my assessment. And there are sort of methods to to tie that to other forms of reputation. But there are reputational fixes to these sorts of things, provided that the community is long-standing enough for it to be meaningful, to have dings to your reputation, right? Like what was unclear in the problem to me was whether or not there's like a swarm of new makers that's suddenly responding to like a need for shields or masks, whatever it is, or if it's more of a staid community that decides to ramp up what they're doing. And so I guess I would just emphasize in this instance that that it does, unless you have the ability, which can be suspect in peer-to-peer systems, unless you have the ability to tie linked trust or trust claims to reputation that people use, in for more generic needs, like a driver's license, that sort of thing. The community needs to be staid enough so that the reputation system can take the effect that it does, like if it's possible to exclude a bad actor from like a space or a next round of production or whatever it is, will something like linked trust be important? There are also psychological effects of kind of staking a claim in a database, though, and signing it, I believe. But whether or not those are sufficient, those kind of psychological effects of articulating a stance is meaningful enough in a circumstance where people's lives are on the line. I'm not sure.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just want to acknowledge. Just acknowledge. Mason is here with us. GB.
Okay.
Just to acknowledge.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Emily. So nice. So yeah. So you jumped ahead in the brainstorming, but you provided us with one direction of solution, link trust. I'm gonna copy and paste that in the brainstorming session. But since you cannot be there, that's a great contribution. And and it's amazing that we could like just iterate fast, and you could come up with something like at least a direction of where to look, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. So I'm gonna jump off, but thanks
Yes.
for having me. And Tiberius knows that I'm a huge fan of peer production in all forms from an ideological place. So anything that y'all need, please feel free to reach out.
Yeah. So we
Right.
haven't heard from Frank. Yeah. Thank you, Emily. I don't know if you're still here. Yes, Frank, could you provide some input on top of what we saw? If we go back to where is it? Yeah, if we go back to slide 14 maybe, or 13. Yeah, so let's do like the others. You tell us a little bit about you. So situate yourself within your work context, work environment, organization, and then let's see, what is the diagram here that speaks to you most? Is it 12 or 13? And then we will try to understand where you're sitting on that diagram, from which place you're speaking to, and where you're looking out, right? Yeah. So just start by describing your activities, your organization.
So I think 12, the 12th slide.
Okay. So let's move on 12 then. Okay.
Yeah. So Africa Ushers an NGO and the community. So I think I also keep pointing to the screen. So we're thank you. So we work with local maker spaces, but not limited to local maker spaces, to identify communal challenges of users / community members. So the users can sometimes are sometimes community members. So we work with local maker spaces to come up with solutions for community members. So I mean, we do leverage the resources that repositories and platforms also provide to come up with these solutions also. I don't know if that makes any sense.
So, is it more process-oriented, coordination, or developers of designs, or developers of services among them, or just a place of coordination, information, knowledge? Like, what is?
Yeah, it's a bit of coordination, information. I would say we are more enablers than doers.
Okay.
As we don't develop the hardware ourselves. We are
okay. Yes, that's what I wanted to know. Enablers.
Yeah. So we are more of enablers than doers.
Enablers, and okay, and it's like educational programs.
Educational programs and capacity building programs also.
Okay.
Yes.
And what is your relation? Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh no, please.
You also have relationships with open source hardware developers. I mean, within the GOSH. Did you say OSH or GOSH? Africa. Okay. Yes. It's like this. Okay.
Yeah.
So within GOSH, which is the larger organization, through that you do have relations with communities that develop scientific instruments, right? Open source scientific instruments.
Yes, we do.
Okay, so you do have a relationship with these people.
Yeah,
and
we do have a relationship.
How do you combine both roles? What happens in your brain when you combine both roles when talking to hardware developers and talking to users and makerspaces? Like, what can you describe, like, because you have two relations, like what's in the middle? What's happening in your organization?
Well, mostly the hardware developers are associated with innovation hubs, maker spaces. So there's not much of a division here in that regard. So it's easier for a relationship to develop. There are not a lot of community members that are independent developers, as most of them are associated with maker spaces. And we are yet to develop a concrete relationship with users or community members in that sense to identify communal problems where these local maker spaces or these developers can come up with ideas and solutions to these communal challenges. But that is one of the goals of our community, to not only have a relationship with these developers and maker spaces, but also to have a relationship with users where we can build a bridge between community members or users and developers and the local maker spaces, where communal challenges can move from community to maker spaces or to developers, and then solutions would move from local maker spaces and developers to the users or the community members.
So who are the users? Can you describe the users?
Local community members.
It's like just people, or maybe some.
Just people.
Just people. Okay. Because I was under the impression that this was more about open source scientific instrumentation, but I was wrong, right?
Yeah, no, it is about open source scientific instrumentation.
and that is meant to be used by anyone in any community, right?
Well, I wouldn't say anyone. I wouldn't put it that way, but people who need it, and institutions and organizations who need it, and community members or the users can be organizations, could be local hospitals, could be
Oh,
schools,
okay,
could
okay,
be
yeah,
labs.
I understand. Because when you say community members, I'm thinking of just people in a village that need some irrigation
Oh,
system.
sorry, no, I should have been more clear on that.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
So users are some type of institutions, right?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So you are somehow in alignment with James,
Oh,
right?
okay.
Because isn't that the case? Is there a strong requirement for quality and security for these instruments?
Yeah, that has been one of the challenges when it comes to open scientific instruments,
Yeah.
quality control. But I can't really say there is at the moment, but we are finding, we are coming up with ways where we can measure the quality of open scientific tools that are developed by local maker spaces. So what we usually do is we leverage our community membership with GOSH in Africa, OSH, where community members have they have the opportunity to scrutinize and peer review scientific tools that are developed by local developers and local maker spaces.
Can you give an example? Can you give an example, like a story about one project?
It's not a complete story, but yes.
Mm-hmm.
So right now, a local maker space in the northern part of Ghana is developing a low-cost Arduino-based micro-centrifuge for local. Did you say something?
No, I'm saying because we developed one we worked on centrifuge at the Sensorica lab for almost a year.
That's amazing. Yeah. So they're mostly expensive, and local hospitals and labs in the northern part of Ghana, which are remote, have no access to electricity. So we are developing this microcentrifuge that will be solar powered for the labs and the hospitals in the local village. So one thing that they are also doing is they are also collaborating with the technical expert of the labs to identify what exactly they need the microcentrifuge to do, how to properly customize it. And one of the issues that came up is quality control. How do we measure how effective the hardware is? So at the moment, he's still building it, but in a couple of weeks, we would have to engage the global community and also global makers to scrutinize and to peer review the hardware for.
So you're going on the field. So you're going on the field, and you sit between the hospital and the designers, and pass information, ask the local hospital what kind of centrifuges they need. They say, oh, we don't have electricity sometimes, and then with them you say, well, maybe the solution would be a solar power one, and then you go to the designers and say, can you prototype a centrifuge that works on solar power? And then you go back to them and can you test this? Is that the role that you're doing, coordinating between these two actors?
Yes and no.
Okay.
Most often we go together. We go with the developers, the local maker spaces, to identify the problem. So it's more of us and the local maker spaces, then we find a communal challenge.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. Okay, So before we go into a little break and move to the brainstorming, I just wanted James, if you can bounce from what you said and see if we can make some arrows for relations, right, between
Sure.
this positioning.
Frank, do you have a library of designs that you guys have created?
Unfortunately, we don't.
Okay. Do you internally have something where you have collected the various different designs you've done?
No, we mostly leverage the one we get from the global open science hardware community.
Okay, so mostly you pull designs from other teams that have made,
Yes.
let's say, a centrifuge or a microscope or something of that
Yeah.
sort.
Yeah.
Got it. And you are more implementing it locally.
Yeah.
Got it. I understand. That makes complete sense. It seems like you're localizing those designs to a specific issue, right?
Yeah, that's what we're doing.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense to me.
Good. So I suppose so. So you find a design, you make it, you test it, see if it works. Now, I believe that work has value because now your design is, if it does work, it's not just a design on the internet, it's a tested design, which is much more than a design. And if it's a successfully tested design, that new specification to this artifact is also very important. So are you putting, how are you contributing back to the ecosystem to say, that thing we took it, we modified it, we tested it, it works, it's used in a hospital. Is there some signals back to the community of open source designers out there? Is there a feedback mechanism or that doesn't go out that way?
That's an interesting question. Thank you for that. So what we're doing as part of that process, the question you asked is where we organize educational events for our community members and local maker spaces, so they don't just take from the repositories and the platforms, but whatever they develop and they test and work, they have to give it back. So then we have to educate them on how to properly document and then share it with the global community.
Interesting. Okay. James, do you see something from what Emmeline was saying with trust? How she framed that? Link trust. I mean, does it ring a bell to you? Is it the first time you heard about that, or
no? But we use a different bit of language around it. We use assertions, and what that is in our language. Frank's team would be, let's say, taking an OKH from the design library, implementing it locally, right? And then asserting that there was an instance of that being used, and maybe they ran some validation tests to confirm that it's working to spec. Let's assume for the moment that there's a fault found. There's another opportunity there.
Yes.
Let's say the fault is actually in the design and they can identify that. Then they could go to our repositories or an equivalent library and raise an issue, right? And that would begin the design process once again. If that issue was substantive enough, let's say it put people at risk or some way or another, that might even kick off a process of withdrawing that design from the library until that issue had been resolved.
All right. So yeah, I understand. So that repository has a sort of this role of a trusted source of good design of designs that are then have metadata on top of them saying that this has been tested and works, this has a problem, right? So you're knowing what you're playing with. You're adding
Yeah.
trust to the sea of to the mess of open source designs out there, right?
I think that's the intention with that set, is that these are meant to be a set of trusted designs that are confirmed against a real world production.
Okay, perfect. Okay, listen, so let's take a 5-minute toilet break, and when we come back, we're gonna
Tibi,
Yes.
it would be interesting to hear Andrew takes on the interaction between, you know, the different schemes, the different diagrams here, and we could end up. I think would be helpful to hear you, Andrew.
Yes, thank you for the interjection.
You want to do that after the break?
Okay, no, okay, we can do it now if you want.
I think the one thing that's I'm sort of scratching my head over as I look at the different diagrams is where the resources come from. I'm trying not to say who pays, but you know, my role in this system is either usually as a user. You know, I'm working for an aid agency that is that needs things to be made locally. You know, I need the items to be made and then distributed to the local hospitals or whatever, or often also as the donor. I'm the one paying for a network of maker spaces to go and make whatever items, face shields or whatever. So I guess what I don't know where that other role is, whether that's the NGO. What, you know, in the ideal scenario, I mean, I think the reason why the NGO is in this diagram, the reason why we might be seen as the donor, is because we're an intermediary for the money. You know, that, you know, the money is actually supposed to be coming from the Ministry of Health or the United Nations with UNICEF or something, but they quite frankly can't manage the contracting. They can't do, and by contracting it isn't just you know, the idea of working with lots and lots of makers. It's the concept of are we able to get these producers through our procurement system? And most of their procurement systems are globalized procurement systems. So, you know, it doesn't matter if they're local or not. It only depends on price. And so if a local one is $10, but there's one made on the other side of the planet for $7, the UN will choose the $7 one. So, you know, which is something I'm trying to change. So I guess in some ways that the NGOs act as a sort of disintermediary for the donors. We do the extra legwork, contracting people that you know, because they're, you know, we'll take the risk on the procurement that you know, the ministry or the donor won't, the major aid agency like UNICEF won't. So I'm sort of thinking in terms of that trust. I've been in a situation before where we've tried to get something made. It hasn't been made, hasn't been delivered. We've ended up having to pay the manufacturer in advance, so our money's gone. And where the NGO loses out because we took the risk and that, you know, the item wasn't delivered. the government isn't taking the risk, the UNICEF agency isn't taking the risk. So the NGO is the one that gets screwed in that system because we've acted as that intermediary. So I think in the differences between the different diagrams, it's that, you know, that the role of the NGO, or that, you know, who pays and trying to buy locally. I would also like to see in the future some kind of insurance approach brought into this, a little bit like what you see with microfinance, where you can have an insurance on some of your payments, or where you have things like purchase order financing. So it's not the NGO taking the risk, it's some bank, it's some financial body that is taking the risks and doing purchase order financing, because the payment is different to the cash flow, and somehow those I think need to be separated. Those are some of my thoughts, but this is based on my role. You know, the reason I joined the IoP is because I need this thing to exist, because I'm facing these problems. I face these sorts of problems, so I thought I'd touch on those.